In programming, a repetition structure, or sometimes referred to as a loop, is a block of code or process that is repeated over and over again while some condition is met, or it's repeated over and over again a certain number of times. So there are two types of repetition structures. One is a fixed iterative, in which a counter is used to execute the loop a certain number of times. So my ActionScript code I've demonstrated down here at the bottom. I have two variables, I is a number, z is a number equaling 0, and then a for loop is the structure that we use for fixed iterative repetitions in ActionScript. And we have the keyword for, and inside parentheses are actually three statements. The first one is an initialization statement that sets our counter equal to some value. So my counter is the variable I set it equal to 1. Then I have a semicolon, and the second statement is the condition that's being evaluated. While as long as I is less than or equal to 10, I'm going to keep doing this loop. And then the third statement in the parentheses is how my counter is being incremented or decremented. In this case, I'm incrementing it by 1 using I++. So each time through the loop, I is going to increment. So it's going to go from 1 to 2 to 3. And eventually, when it hits 11, it's going to be outside this range, and the loop would no longer execute. And the execution would then continue with the statements after my curly bracket that closes this repetition structure. So first time through the loop, I is equal to 1, and we're going to add I, or 1, to 0, which is 0, and z becomes 1. Next time through the loop, I becomes 2. It's being incremented, still within the parameters of my condition. 2 is less than or equal to 10. And now we're going to add 2 to 1, and z becomes 3. Next time through the loop, I is 3. 3 is still less than 10. We're going to add 3 to the value of 3, and z is now 6. And we continue through this process, and so what is happening is we're getting the sum of the numbers between 1 and 10. Once I becomes 11, the loop stops executing, and we continue with the execution with the statements that would come after this curly bracket. Now, in real-life examples, we want to think about what a fixed iterative is like. We might think of a cuckoo clock. And at the stroke of a certain hour, the cuckoo is going to come out and chirp a certain number of times. So at 3 o'clock, the cuckoo is going to come out of the clock and chirp 3 times. At 8 o'clock, it's going to come out of the clock and chirp 8 times. We might also think of a carousel, where you pay your money, you get on the carousel, and the carousel rotates a certain number of times before the ride is over. And finally, you might think of the song 100 Bottles of Beer on the Wall, and that chorus would be repeated 100 times, starting with the value of 100 and going down to 0. Another type of loop is a conditional loop, and here the loop executes while a condition is being evaluated and it equals true. We represent this type of loop in ActionScript using a while structure, or a while loop. And here I have the keyword while, and I've declared some variables here, z, v, and w equaling 0, 1, and 100. And my while statement, and actually I have a little typo here, this w should be a v, while v is, actually just make this variable y rather than v. So, because I've got v a couple times. So while y is less than or equal to w plus 1. So while y is less than 101, we're going to execute these two statements. And the first statement is we're going to increment the value of z by the value of z plus, we're going to replace the value of z by the value of z plus the value of y, in this case 0 plus 1. And then we're going to increment y. Now if we didn't increment y, we would have an endless loop. This loop would go on forever, and our system would hang, or our application would hang. So we always want to make sure we're adjusting the value of the loop if we're using some type of counter like this. Now we could have done the same thing with a for loop, if that's what you're thinking. I just wanted to show you an example of how a while loop works. Normally these variables, rather than being hard-coded to numbers, might come from user input. They might come from the number of records of a database that's being read in. They may come from the system clock. There may be a whole series of different conditions in which a while loop might be met. For example, if we were creating a Monopoly game, and if we rolled doubles, we would roll again. But if we rolled doubles 3 times, then our turn ends. And it's been a while since I played Monopoly, but I think at that point we end up in jail if we rolled doubles 3 times. So that would be an example of using a while loop in creating a game. We can think of a while loop like a light switch, that as long as the switch is in the up position, we're going to shine the light. But when we turn the switch off, that light ceases shining. Or a train, a toy train running on batteries, and as long as the batteries still have juice in them, the train will continue around the clock. Once those batteries die down, the train will stop. Now in this example, what's being performed in the loop may or may not ever be executed. If I change my value here of variable y equals 102, well, 102 is not less than or equal to 101. This would be a false statement, and the condition or the statements in the loop would never be executed. There are times, however, when we want the execution to happen at least once. And so we have a slightly different structure to make that happen. This is another type of conditional loop, and in ActionScript we call this a DoWhile loop. In a DoWhile loop, the process executes once and then the condition is tested. So even if the condition initially evaluated to false, the execution of the code block in that loop would happen at least once. And we use the do statement with our code block in between the curly brackets, and then the while and the condition that's being evaluated in parentheses after the while. So the while condition comes after the do block. Real world examples we might think of with March Madness NCAA basketball tournament coming up, that if you were a team selected to the March Madness basketball tournament, you'd play your first game, and while you won that last game, you would play another game. If, however, you lost, you would cease playing. But you're guaranteed of playing at least one game if you make it to the basketball tournament. You might be a person who likes to try things and willing to try anything, so you may choose to go skydiving. You're going to do that, and then your reaction to that experience may determine whether you do it again or not. If you found it exhilarating and fun, you might go up again and jump out of a plane another time. If, however, you find it horrifying and maybe passed out, you might choose to never do that again. In the next few videos, we will focus in on each of these different types of repetition structures, and I'll show you how to use them in different types of programs.